What's up, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to talk about last-minute guys that you can pick up for Week 4, focusing on the guys that are less than 30% rostered, who are probably still out there in a lot of leagues, that you could pick up, stash, and maybe even start for this upcoming week before the games start tomorrow. And we'll also answer some questions from the fans and commenters who have replied to my videos. I'm going to answer their questions as well. So one of the benefits of this channel, since it's small, is if you ask a question, I'm going to answer it and I'm going to feature it in the videos that I have every Saturday. So please look forward to that and take advantage of this opportunity while you can. So we're going to focus first on the guys that you could start for Week 4, and then we're going to get into some of the fan questions after that. But real quick, the general flow of how things are going to go on a week-to-week basis, it's gonna be late Sunday night, early Monday morning. You'll see a preview of buy, sell, waiver candidates for the upcoming week, focusing on kind of recapping the games that just happened that day. Then there'll be a strategy video that comes out during the week that will come from time to time. The most recent one I made was 7 strategies to help you win your championship when you've already started the season. And then the last, on Saturdays, I'm going to make these videos and answer some questions that you have. So I try to be interactive with all my fans. My purpose of this channel is to help you guys with fantasy football. So please look forward to that. And yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. So who are the guys that you want to pick up that are less than 30% roster for Week 4? And I'm going to mention some guys that I like that are a little bit more heavily rostered, more in the 40s and 50% sometimes. But just to kind of check to see if they're still out there, because there's potential that there might be. The QB that I like the most, who is probably still available for this upcoming week, is Geno Smith. Currently, Geno Smith is only 28% rostered in ESPN formats, which is where I'm pulling these statistics from. So Geno Smith is playing Detroit on Monday night. He has had some decent fantasy performances this season. He hasn't killed you, but he hasn't really jumped off the page as anything great. But I think if you're in a position where you have Anthony Richardson and you're looking for somebody to start in his place for this week, I think Geno Smith is a good option. I think this game against Detroit, you're going to see a lot of passing. Seattle is very involved with multiple receivers that they throw the ball to. Geno Smith runs a lot of plays where he's out of the gun, throwing it down the field. And that sets up the opportunity for a lot of points. He's just got to cut down some of his turnovers that he's had in some of these games that have kind of limited his upside a little bit. But I do think this is a good matchup against Detroit. And if you're one of those teams that's hurting for a quarterback right now, he's a good flyer to take. Another one that I really like that I also think you could start for this week if he's available is Andy Dalton, playing Cincinnati. Excellent game last week for the Panthers. It's still surprising me in ESPN he's only 8% rostered, but I guess because most of their formats are only one quarterback. But 2 quarterbacks, you definitely have to roster Dalton, and I think that there's many circumstances in which I would rather start Andy Dalton. So, for example, I would rather start Andy Dalton this week than Sam Darnold, because Sam Darnold going up against that Green Bay defense, Jair Alexander is probably going to be on Justin Jefferson, and Minnesota hasn't quite played a defense like the Packers yet. I know San Francisco is good and Houston is good, but they're a little bit banged up. We'll see how they do in Lambeau Field now that they're on the road. I think this could be a tough situation for Sam Darnold, and I do like Andy Dalton as a stream option for this week to have a better performance. Other guys that I like as well that I think you could honestly consider playing over some guys like Anthony Richardson, for example, or maybe even Sam Darnold, is Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams showed a lot of promise in this last game, heavily involved on offense, did make some bad turnovers, but ultimately they're showing more trust in him and they're struggling to run the ball. So especially against this Rams defense that has yielded some pretty good passing performances to opposing defenses the last 2 weeks, I think that this is a good opportunity to start Caleb Williams for this week. And you know, this all is relative, but some of those guys that I mentioned before, I would start Caleb Williams over them. And then very deep options to look at for this week. Tyler Huntley of Miami going up against Tennessee. So I put him here because I'm not expecting a great performance, but He was recently announced the starter for Miami, which I think is a better development for that team. Has not played organized, or I don't want to say organized, but he hasn't started in quite some time. So there's probably going to be some rust, especially since he's coming off the practice squad. But he does have rushing upside, which I do like on his behalf. And I think there's a very possible situation where he gives this Dolphins team a spark that they need on offense, maybe rushes for a touchdown as well. He has a very similar play type to Lamar Jackson. This is why the Ravens had him on the roster for many years. And yeah, so now we'll get into the running back position. So first of all, look for these two guys if they are available in the 40% rostered. First of all, Braelon Allen, I believe, is only 44% rostered in ESPN, which is crazy. He needs to be around the 75%, in my opinion. Because I've already talked about him before. If anything happens to Breece Hall, this is an immediate lottery ticket. But I do think this is a situation where I would start him for this week too, potentially depending on your options. Because I think going up against Denver, I do expect the Jets to win this game and win it pretty handily. So I think that Braelon Allen is in a position where he could get a lot of touches, and I could also see him getting a touchdown. I'm expecting maybe around 10 points for him, which is nothing special. I wouldn't put him over the starting running backs necessarily that you likely have on your roster over him. But if you're in a position where you're in a pinch and you need someone to play, I think that he's somebody that you can put in, and it might be a better shot than some fringe receiver that you're not sure how he's going to play. So, for example, Braelon Allen or Xavier Worthy, I think I would go Braelon Allen there. And then I'm down on this player in general, Cam Akers, after this last performance. But I do acknowledge he's got a nice matchup this week. He's got the 29th ranked defense playing the Jacksonville Jaguars, who have just yielded a great game to James Cook last week. And they're struggling. So this should set up a situation where Akers gets a lot of carries and hopefully gets a touchdown. So again, I'm not expecting a great game, and I actually feel more confident about Allen than I do Cam Akers, but I do think this is a good matchup, and if you need a stream candidate, you really can't go wrong most of the time if you put in a running back who is going to be projected to start in the game, just because of the amount of times he's going to be getting the ball throughout the course of the game, especially one where they're projected to dominate and have the lead for most of the game. Other guys, so now the 30% or less, the number one that stood out to me is Alexander Mattison, who's about 30.7% rostered, so I'd include him in his 30% category. He is not had a great fantasy season aside from week one, but he is showing to be the true number one running back on this Raiders team. He also gets Cleveland this week, which is a decent defensive matchup for running backs. And I think that this is going to be an opportunity for him to give you a decent floor that I would feel comfortable putting them out there if absolutely needed. I think in most situations, though, I would not want to start Mattison. I wouldn't start him over those two guys that I mentioned first. But he is somebody to keep an eye on and definitely have on your roster because of his upside to potentially take over this Raiders backfield. Because Zamir White has not really looked great so far. Other guys that I like, so keep an eye out for Justice Hill. He's only 9.7% rostered. He had a great week in week one when the Ravens were playing from behind and needed to pass more. You saw these last 2 weeks against the Raiders and the Cowboys. The Ravens were ahead for most of the game and mostly relied on Derrick Henry. But I'd like to see another situation where Justice Hill could get involved in the passing game. And I think this is a good week to gauge that. I expect him to have better performances than he's had recently. Maybe see 5 targets, 4 catches. I would be very intrigued with Justice Hill if something like that were to happen to throw in as a deep league flyer. The number one running back that I would try to get among the less than 30% rostered, though, is Roschon Johnson. He has a good matchup against the Rams. The Bears have not done well with DeAndre Swift as their starting running back, and Roschon Johnson is showing more promise relative to Khalil Herbert right now in terms of his carries and his efficiency. So I think it would be a good idea to pick up Roschon Johnson. I would not start him right now, but I think that if he is out there, I think this is somebody I would definitely try to get. After Braelon, Allen, and Akers, I would go then Johnson, Mattison, and Hill. Next, I would look at Cordarelle, Patterson. As I said earlier, Arthur Smith has some weird crush on this dude where he just keeps bringing him into his offenses and keeps involving him, even though I think he's got to be like 34 now. It's kind of incredible how long he's stayed in the league. But yeah, I do see a possibility where he does get some involvement with Jalen Warren expected to not play. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens there. He's a stash candidate, but not somebody that I'm really interested in having on my team, to be honest. And then I just want to talk handcuffs again, the importance of that. So if Jamaal Williams is out there, you definitely want to grab him because Kamara is currently questionable. So if you're a Kamara owner, you want to make sure that you have Jamaal Williams rostered, because if Kamara doesn't play, which all signs looks like he is going to play, but if he doesn't for whatever reason, then Jamaal Williams is an immediate RB2 in my opinion. And like I said, some other guys to keep an eye on are the handcuffs. Like I said, keep an eye on that Denver backfield as well. It's looking like it's not going to be Javonte Williams, but it's going to be some combination of either Jaleel McLaughlin or Badie, the backup to him. Those guys have been more involved and more efficient than Javonte Williams. So keep an eye on that situation. I think it's a good idea to stash either of them too. Wide receivers. So I like more of the wide receivers that you can pick up for this week personally than some of the running backs. And the number one guy that I would try to get among the wide receivers available is Xavier Legette. Xavier Legette is only about 24% rostered in ESPN leagues. He gets Cincinnati, which we saw what Cincinnati just let Jaden Daniels do this past week. And on top of that, with this Carolina team, they've got some injuries to their receivers right now. And just as an aside real quick, I don't really want to focus on like necessarily the news of who's supposed to play and who's not supposed to play, but more so what you do to set yourself up for some of this news, because stuff changes throughout the week and you never really know when somebody is going to play until Sunday. So, but the more of the focus of my advice is just going to be on what you do with these injuries and how you monitor it through the week. So with Xavier Legette, this is an interesting situation to keep an eye on because Adam Thielen placed on IR. So this sets up Legette to be the number 2 receiver. Deontay Johnson has a groin injury, and it's expected that he'll play. But if he doesn't, then now Legette is lined up as the hypothetical number 1 as his second-round pick from the season. And I think people are a little scared of him because he did have that goose egg performance with no targets against the Chargers. But you got a different quarterback this time. You're also going up against a defense that is struggling right now. Legette is somebody who's got a lot of potential. They need a void filled on this team, and I think that this is if he's out there, I would feel comfortable playing him if Deontay Johnson doesn't play, to throw him into that flex spot because I think that he could have a great game. A safer option, though, but not as high for me as the potential of Legette minus Deontay Johnson, is Trey Tucker of Las Vegas. They get the Cleveland Browns this week, which is, you saw what Malik Neighbors did to them last week. So Trey Tucker is a slot guy. I like him in PPR formats. But the other thing, too, is that Devontae Adams is dealing with injury, and if he doesn't play, then that makes things look even better for Tucker. So the two great options there. And then another very good option, Michael Wilson, only 14% rostered. He's coming off a game this past week against Detroit where he was 8 for 64 and 9 targets, and now he's getting the 32nd ranked pass defense in Washington. I think that this is going to more so go to Marvin Harrison more than anything, but Michael Wilson is set up to be in a good position as a deep league streamer that you could put in there, and I think can give you passable enough value to be happy with his performance. And then another guy that's very intriguing as well, I'm not sure I would want to start him, but it's something to monitor, is Demario Douglas. He is emerging as the number 1 receiver for the Patriots right now. It looked like it might be Hunter Henry, but now it's starting to tilt a little more towards Douglas. He had, coming off a game, 7 of 69 on 9 targets. And I always like to look at these guys that have targets because it shows involvement in the offense and the likelihood of these performances repeating itself in the future. So Demario Douglas, he gets a tough matchup against San Francisco, but you like that he's going to be the number one receiver on this team. Hopefully they're going to be in a position where they need to throw to him a lot because I'm suspecting that they're going to be down in this game. So yeah, this is another intriguing guy to keep an eye on. There's not many situations I would want to start him, but I think that this is another player to keep an eye on and to stash on your roster. Other guys that to bring up as well as honorable mentions, Romeo Doubs has struggled in recent weeks, but remember back in week 1, he had 7 targets with Jordan Love. He's right now the 3rd wide receiver on this team, and I think when Love gets back, which is hopefully this weekend, you'll see more involvement of Romeo Doubs in the Packers offense. And then Jalen Nailor for the Vikings, he's scored a touchdown in the last 3 games. Like to see a little more targets, but with Jair Alexander expected to be on Justin Jefferson in this game, this could open up more opportunities for Nailor. And he's an interesting guy to have on your team and kind of see how the situation develops. So for tight ends, tight ends are just the thing with tight ends is that a lot of the elite tight ends are already rostered, and there's not very many situations where you want to start one of these fringe guys over them. So and I'll talk about this in a sec, but guys like Kelsey and Mark Andrews, you're kind of in a position where you can't really start a streamer over them because of their elite upside, but they're also killing you with their point totals right now. So I say some of this is a grain of salt. Maybe you have an injury like Trey McBride or something, but generally, if you have an elite tight end and they're not performing well, the best option is to just put them out there again and just hope and pray that it was a 1-week fluke. Or in the case of Andrews, a 3-week fluke. But yeah, that's the sad reality of the situation at this position. But guys that you do want to pick up that are out there, and I'm going to stretch this out a little further beyond 30%. 47% rostered is Zach Ertz. I think he's got a great matchup against Arizona. Washington has gotten him involved quite a bit so far, and I think that Ertz is going to continue to be relied upon in this Cliff Kingsbury offense. It's looking like the pecking order right now among the receiving core is McLaughlin number 1, and then you've got Ertz as number 2. You do have the running backs as well, but I'm talking more specifically pass catchers. Yeah, so Ertz, I think is going to be a very sneaky tight end that you can utilize most of the season. Mike Gesicki for the Bengals is another good option for this week going up against the 30th ranked defense against tight ends in Carolina. A little bit of a down week in week 3 compared to his week 2 breakout, but I think that he'll have a solid enough game against Carolina that you could have him fill in if you're that Trey McBride owner or that Evan Ingram owner that's still trying to find a replacement for him. Although honestly, at this point, you should probably just drop Evan Ingram. Speaking of the Jaguars, the less than 30% guys, Brenton Strange has done well the last 2 weeks. He's gotten at least 5 targets in the last 2 games. I'm not very high on his upside, but I do think that this is a good option to consider for this week at the tight end position. And Tyler Conklin is another good one. He's only 30% rostered in ESPN leagues. So he's his last game he had 6 targets, 5 receptions, and 93 yards. So starting to develop some of that rapport with Aaron Rodgers that you like to see. I think he could have another good game. And I think Strange and Conklin are good deep league flyers to consider as well. And then these are guys that I would not want to start. But if you're in deep situations where you need someone, you got Elijah Higgins for the Arizona Cardinals filling in for McBride. But he's only had, I got to double check his stats, but he's only maxed out at 2 targets for the past 3 weeks. And he did get a touchdown in one of the games, but I just don't think that's going to be enough volume to sustain itself for this upcoming matchup against Washington. You do like that defensive matchup, but I just don't think the volume is there that it's going to translate into a great play. Hayden Hurst is another deep flyer to throw out there just because they're playing Kansas City, which is the worst defense right now against tight ends. But yeah, I would not want to go there personally. Brock Wright is interesting because if you're in the situation where you have Sam Laporta It's looking like Laporta is going to play, but I think the option, if you own him, is to roster Brock Wright as your backup tight end. If Sam Laporta doesn't play, then you just flip Brock Wright in there. Yeah, because I think that all these guys that I mentioned, like Ertz, Gesicki, Strange, Conklin, etc., you don't want to start those guys over Sam Laporta, like I said. But since Laporta's playing Monday night, you kind of have to make up your mind before that game. So what I personally would do is just roster Brock Wright as a handcuff. If Laporta plays, then you're good to just put Laporta in there. And then if he doesn't, then you can go to your backup option and use Brock Wright. I would not roster Brock Wright unless you happen to have Laporta, though, personally. Defensive matchups for this week. And this kind of ties into a question that Dylan O'Shea had in the comments. I'll get into that in a little bit. He's asked some good defenses to pick up for week 4. If you want to see a more specific breakdown, look at my video that I had on Tuesday if you're interested in checking that out. But good defenses that are lightly rostered for this week. So Miami against Tennessee was the popular pickup. They were 69% rostered now. But consider Tennessee versus Miami. Tennessee is a good defense, and Miami has struggled offensively. I expect this game to be relatively low scoring and could be a lot of turnovers between these two quarterbacks. So Tennessee is a good play as well. Las Vegas is 41% rostered against Cleveland. I'm not very high on that take personally, even though they have the highest projection on ESPN, just because Las Vegas got lit up by the Panthers last week. Green Bay is a good matchup against Minnesota, 27% rostered. I think that they'll make some good plays and hold their own in that game. Philadelphia against Tampa Bay is also interesting too, because Philadelphia struggled the first 2 weeks but looked great against New Orleans. And then only 30% rostered, Buffalo against Baltimore. I think that I would feel comfortable starting Baltimore for this week. Starting Buffalo for this week because, the last 3 games they had 7, 16, and 14 points. And Baltimore is a good offense, but they haven't exactly been lighting the world on fire necessarily. So I think Buffalo is, if you're looking at a long-term play, I think Buffalo will hold up for this week, but has the best potential of being a good defense that you could roster throughout the season. So now we'll get into answering the questions from the fans who replied to the comments, and we'll start with Dylan O'Shea, who has some very good questions. Thank you for your support for the channel. So dynasty value of the following players. He's in a keeper league where he keeps 5 players. So Travis Etienne, Josh Jacobs, Puka Nacua, Brian Thomas Jr., T. Higgins, Tank Dell, and Sam Laporta. Those are all guys on his roster. He needs to keep 5, so he asked if I could rank them. So pretty easily number 1 for me is Puka Nacua. I know he's injured, but just so much upside throughout his career. I think you got to hold on to him. Next, I would go Travis Etienne. I know they're struggling, but I do think he's a great running back, and I think that likely they're going to have a new coach next season, and hopefully he can get things turned around, or maybe he can go the Saquon Barkley route and just end up on a better team. Number 3 for me is Laporta, because he has a lot of upside at a pretty scarce tight end position. I don't think you could really find a lot of options better than him that you could likely have in keeper formats like that. So he would be number 3. 4 would be Josh Jacobs for me. And then for me personally, I have T. Higgins at 5. And I think that this is kind of on the fringe with how Brian Thomas does over the next couple weeks. But for me personally, I just haven't seen it with T. Higgins. I know that he's a very special talent, but he just doesn't get the volume that you would like for somebody that has his pedigree and the range that he goes in drafts. And he's often injured. So the combination of that makes him to be a very difficult receiver to trust. That's more of a hypothetical than a actual surefire guy that you want to hold on to. Kind of in the same line of Jalen Waddle. So yeah, for T. Higgins, he would be 5, but I would be open to shifting that one depending on how even Tank Dell does, but Brian Thomas as well. Who has better upside among Chuba Hubbard and Cortland Sutton? I think Chuba Hubbard has a lot of upside personally. I am not convinced that Jonathan Brooks is just going to come in and just dominate the backfield when he gets there. I think it'll be the situation to monitor, but Chuba Hubbard I think will still have value for a couple weeks. And he's got a great matchup against Cincinnati. Cortland Sutton is good in that he is their best receiver on the Broncos, but he seems to have limited upside to me just based on the offense. So in a follow-up question, Dylan asked if he should look to trade Cortland Sutton for Bucky Irving, and I would definitely do that because ultimately Cortland Sutton is a guy that you have on your bench that you really would not want to put in to start unless you have an injury or a bye week. And Irving's potential is more so starting running back, depending on what happens with Rachaad White if he gets injured. So, yeah, I would definitely try to get Bucky Irving if you can do that. I think that would be a trade I'd be all over making. And then an interesting question here of how do you rank Derek Carr, Geno Smith, Sam Darnold, and Trevor Lawrence? I'm going to do this both for this week and for future. Trevor Lawrence is easily fourth of that list. Sad to say he's just not lived up to the hype. For this week, I would go Smith 1, Carr 2, Darnold 3. But for the season, I would go Carr 1, Smith 2, and Darnold 3. And, you know, those three guys are really hard to rank because they're all kind of in that same line of guys that are like stream-worthy quarterbacks that they can have great matchups from time to time, but also can fall off the face of the cliff sometimes. So I just feel that I have more trust in the ability of the Seahawks offense to put up points for Geno Smith consistently than the other guys. I think that Derek Carr, or at least for this week specifically, I like the matchup against Detroit. I think that Smith will be a good play. I do like Carr slightly more during the season, though, just because you look at the offensive play calling. I feel like Shanahan, or the Shanahan system with Clint Kubiak is going to set up Carr to be successful, but it is very close to him and Geno. Darnold I do like as well in Minnesota, but he's played well for 3 games, and he has a track record for most of his career of being mediocre. So I do kind of see a little regression in that situation. But all 3 of these guys are good stream-worthy quarterbacks for this week to consider, but not elite guys that I would want to roll with the entire season. And then an interesting question, when to drop a kicker on your roster. So what I personally do is I do not roster a kicker through the week because it gives me the opportunity to hold a running back or a receiver that I think could either be a handcuff or be a trade piece. So, for example, in one of my leagues, I have Alvin Kamara, and I rostered Jamaal Williams as I don't have a kicker roster right now. I have Jamaal Williams, so that way if Kamara doesn't play, I could just put him on IR, use that extra spot to fill up a kicker. Or if Kamara does play, I just drop Williams for that week, and then I put in the kicker for that position. Or if there's some other injury, I could possibly drop somebody else as well for the kicker. But the reason this is important is because if anything changes throughout the week with one of those pieces that you have, then it could really be an excellent play for you. Like, look at what, as I said, you refer to this in some of my previous videos as well, but Jordan Mason is kind of in that situation where you may have rostered him with that last spot instead of a kicker, and now you have a starting running back that's projected to start through most of the season. So, yeah, this is a great topic of discussion. I'm happy to talk about this more as well, but for me personally, the kicking performances, unless you have the elite guys like Tucker and Aubrey, are going to be all over the place, and it's going to cycle who has good weeks and bad weeks. So I just would rather figure that out Sunday morning and decide who to drop then, and then whoever that person I dropped is blocked through the day until the Sunday game, so then you won't have to worry about somebody else picking them up. So speaking of Jordan Mason, there is an interesting question from Mr. Asono about what do you do if you're a Christian McCaffrey owner and you don't have Jordan Mason on your roster? So to me, the best thing that you can do if you have Christian McCaffrey and don't have Mason is to try to do anything you can to trade for Mason. Because right now, ultimately, we don't know the timeline of Christian McCaffrey fully. There's all kinds of news that have come out of He's gone to Germany to see specialists. They say there's micro tears. Well, like as somebody who studies, like physical therapy and the healing of muscles and stuff, is that anytime you have any kind of strain, there are micro tears. So that story is a little bit fabricated to me in terms of how serious it is. I think ultimately it really just comes down to the individual, Christian McCaffrey or like his coaching staff about like what is his injury, how long is it going to take, because different people recover at different rates from these type of things. So with that being said, you're kind of just in a holding pattern. But if Christian McCaffrey comes back, he is the elite piece. And you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you trade McCaffrey away for pennies on the dollar, because if you're in a position where you're hanging on around 500, you having Christian McCaffrey come back is probably better than the potential of whatever you would get for him right now. Unless you could really pull off a great deal, I would go for Mason personally. And there was another question in my channel as well that had asked a very similar question about what to do with Jordan Mason if you own him but don't have Christian McCaffrey, from Paul Graves. Talked about different guys that you could want to trade for Jordan Mason away for. And I think that in this situation, both, if you want to make sure the top goal is having Christian McCaffrey on your roster, but Jordan Mason right now commands the value of another running back. So I think that if you have if you have a starting running back that you're putting in at RB2, I would be willing to part with him to get Jordan Mason on your team, because that San Francisco backfield, they give whoever the running back is the majority of the carries. So whether that's McCaffrey or Mason, that's an excellent piece to have in fantasy. So if you have a guy like, and I think that the pinnacle of guys that I would be trying to give away is Jahmyr Gibbs in terms of the elite running back names, because Gibbs is always going to be in a timeshare with Montgomery as long as they're both healthy. So Gibbs is a great player, but I think that Jordan Mason, just on his total volume, I would rather have him right now personally. So I think that if you can command, if you have a player that's less than Jahmyr Gibbs, like an Aaron Jones, I would be willing to try to give him away for Jordan Mason, because you want to lock up that San Francisco backfield, whether you have Mason or McCaffrey. But me personally, prioritize keeping McCaffrey as long as you can, because that could be a piece that really helps you when you get to the playoffs. All right, next question is from Thomas Westendorf. What if you're 0-3 and people in your league do not trade, or people that are trading have similar weaknesses? So I think that the first question I guess I have is like if this is a league with friends, or if it's more so just like a league you sign up for online where you don't really know anybody in the league. Because I think if it's like friends, like sometimes people just don't really stay on top of the fantasy apps and their rosters, and they don't really make trades. And sometimes you could actually get better negotiations with people if you talk to them personally and then you explain it. Obviously, you then have to put on your businessman face and try to sell things from a perspective that benefits you. But if you're not in a position like that and you can't talk to them directly outside of just sending a trade request, then I think the best thing you could do is just try the best you can. If you see an offer out there, just put it out there, and ultimately if they don't reply to it, then there's nothing you can really do about it. But you don't have to make trades to improve your team. You can find guys on waivers that are good pickups as well. And like I said in my strategies video, if you focus on picking up good handcuff guys with potential that can fill in the bench spots on your team, they will have some value when injuries happen. And I think if you make good moves on the waivers, then that's in a way improving your team, that you don't necessarily have to have trades, as long as you're getting the guys at the right time that are when their value is starting to peak. So you could make improvements as well through waivers. Doesn't have to be through trades to be successful in fantasy football. Question from Clark Taylor. So this is a tough question. So he has Jawan Jennings, but he also has Kittle and Debo. He also has Higgins and Moss, and he needs to pick one of them to start in the flex. So a lot of variables to this question because, George Kittle's supposed to play. Debo looking like he's not going to play. And then Jawan Jennings went off last week. But what does he look like if all of them are healthy or one of them are healthy? So I think if Kittle plays, first of all, you put him in your tight end position. I'm not sure what your backup option is, but Kittle would play. Kittle you would start if he plays. In terms of what to do between Jennings, Higgins, and Moss. So for me personally, the thing that scares me about Jennings for this week is that I do think that he will have some volume again, but he's playing the Patriots. And there's a good chance that San Francisco gets out to an early lead and doesn't need to utilize Jennings in this game. So I'm a little bit hesitant to put him in and start him again for this next week. I think that he could have a good... there's a world where he does give you 15 plus points, but I think there's also a world where he is very disappointing. The safest play to me of this group is Higgins because of the matchup with Carolina, but I think that Moss is also not a bad option either. So for me personally, the way I would rank this is Higgins, Jennings, and Moss. But in my opinion, if you need just a safe play that you're not really concerned about, you don't really need this position to give you points, but you want to make sure that the volatility doesn't kill you, then I would do Moss because Moss is going to get the volume. But I think in terms of how I would start them for the upside, I would go Higgins, Jennings, and then Moss. So yeah, that's how I would approach that question there for you. So some other questions that we'll look at as well, and we'll what we'll do is if you have any additional questions, feel free to comment, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can before the game starts tomorrow. But yeah, this is how the format is going to be. Comment and reply to the questions that I put out there. And, excuse me, misspoke a little bit. So if you comment your questions in the comment section, then I will answer them and put them in the Saturday video. So feel free to do that, whether you want them to be the upcoming week or if you want them to be before Sunday. Just let me know, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. So some other questions as well from some of the fans that had replied on the channel. McLaughlin for Pickens. What would you do there? So I would prefer McLaughlin right now because both these guys are in very similar situations where the offenses were kind of viewed to be somewhat limited, but they're both projected to be number one receivers. And they're both playing well right now, but the offense of the Commanders, it looks awesome with Jaden Daniels. And yes, Fields is playing better, but let's see how he does in a few weeks because he hasn't put up performances quite like Jaden Daniels so far. Yeah, so I just think there's more upside with McLaughlin personally. I do know that a lot of people like Pickens though, but I think if you got to pick between the two of them, I would go with the side that is trading for Terry McLaurin. Another question about 16-team league, big league here. From Marshall Hodges. He has Stroud, Montgomery, Moss, AJ Brown, Ayuk, Laporta, Jaden Reed, and Hubbard. Unfortunately, a lot of injuries to that roster, which hope you guys get healthy, man. 1 and 2 now. Any tips? So what I would recommend in this situation is he's got some good players, but I think there's some upgrades that he can make. One of them I would look at is Chuba Hubbard, and I do think that Chuba Hubbard is a great play for this week, but he's also a great sell high candidate because of how he's playing right now, because Jonathan Brooks is coming back. And I think that Chuba Hubbard, like I said, there's a situation where he still is involved with Carolina in that passing or in the passing game or getting some touches in the backfield. When Brooks comes back, I don't see it going fully to Brooks. But I also feel that the game that Chuba Hubbard had this past week against Las Vegas, there's a good chance that doesn't repeat itself ever again in his career. So I think that this is a good opportunity to try to sell on Chuba if you can. I would start there. And then also, I think that if there's any way that you can get one of the buy low quarterbacks for Stroud, I think Stroud will have better games, but because he doesn't give you the rushing upside, I would personally go for a quarterback that has more rushing upside. And I recommend Hurts because he has A.J. Brown there. All right. And then a question about from Bryce about dropping, deciding who to drop between Calvin Ridley, Kareem Hunt, and and Gesicki. So McBride is not going to play, so he probably has to play Gesicki. For me personally, I think of that group, I would not drop Calvin Ridley. I would not drop Jonathan Brooks. So Kareem Hunt to me would be the guy to go because I have a lot of concerns about the Chiefs as a backfield. Carson Steele is the guy that got all the carries last week, but with Kareem Hunt coming in and Samaje Perine and Clyde Edwards-Helaire coming back, I see this thing becoming a mess where it could be 3 to 4 guys getting involved at a time. I'm not very high on any one of them in particular being great, so I would personally try to move on from Kareem Hunt because I just don't see the amount of upside there that will be consistent. All right, and then the last question is from Paul Graves. He, as I said earlier, was asking about what to do with Jordan Mason if you don't have Christian McCaffrey, and I said to try to recommend to trade him to Mason, see if you can get a running back on his team. You want to make sure with Jordan Mason that you are getting a good running back because on this guy's roster, he had Gibbs, Etienne, and Chuba Hubbard and Jonathan Brooks. So the combination of Chuba Hubbard and Jonathan Brooks to me does not equal the value of Jordan Mason. I would personally go for Gibbs, and I think there's a chance he may do that. But I think even if you get ETN, I think that is solid value as well if you're in a position where you don't have McCaffrey. But ultimately, unless you're getting Gibbs, I would not trade Jordan Mason to him unless you can figure out a way to trade McCaffrey to him get Christian McCaffrey from him. And some pieces that I would be willing to part with to get Christian McCaffrey are some of the fringe flex receivers that you may have on your roster. So examples of this in Paul's roster are he has Chris Godwin, Jaden Reed, Khalil Shakir, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. I think all 4 of those receivers are guys that I'd be willing to part with McCaffrey because his starting receivers are CD and Marvin Harrison Jr. locked in as your top 2. You have good flex wide receivers between Godwin and Reed, especially when Love comes back. That I think if you lose one of them, you can still stay afloat. And then that gives you the potential of Jordan Mason when you have Christian McCaffrey come back. Keep in mind, his roster also has Pacheco. So if he gets back Christian McCaffrey, Pacheco, and then he has also has Kenneth Walker, also has CD and Marvin Harrison Jr., that's the best thing you can do in my opinion. So for me personally, for Paul, I would recommend if you can to try to get McCaffrey instead of trading Mason. But if you do want to trade away Mason, I think that I would try to get into that McCaffrey manager and make sure that you can get ideally Gibbs, but ETN is not a bad consolation. All right, so that's all I've got for this video. Like I said, comment if you want to have any questions answered before Sunday. I'll try my best to get back to you before the games start. But if not, look forward to the next video that'll be coming out Sunday night, Monday morning, which will be a Week 5 early preview of the waivers and buy and sell candidates. Well, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.